The 30th anniversary is a great moment in the life of CEDAW. When somebody turns 30, we usually assume they've been through their troubled adolescence, they've got through their 20s, and they're now going to embark perhaps on their serious adult life. And I think it's perhaps quite helpful to think of CEDAW in the same way. It was a very interesting treaty. It was drafted very, very fast for an international treaty in a matter of just a couple of years. And it very much was the product of the global feminist movement coming out of the Mexico conference in 1975. So it was a very significant, it really came from a huge push from civil society. And of course, there are flaws in its drafting. There are things that today we might think that it misses out or it doesn't deal with accurately, or adequately I should say, but overall the fact that it's lasted for 30 years and I think has made real differences in the life of women around the world in quite a number of different ways makes it a cause of some celebration. Some of the problems, for example, one of the obvious gaps, if you just pick up the CEDAW Convention and look at it, is the fact that there nowhere is a reference to violence against women, which we know from all the work that's been done is truly one of the major human rights issues for women, and it's just not reflected at all in the treaty. However, it's been possible to update some of the treaty provisions through general recommendations, and the committee that looks after CEDAW, that monitors CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women, now has adopted a general recommendation covering the issue of violence. So over the 30 years it has been possible to plug some of the gaps in the treaty. Elizabeth Evatt has played a really significant role in the life of CEDAW. She came with a fantastically expert background. Elizabeth Evatt was, of course, the first Chief Judge of the Family Court of Australia, played an incredibly important role in establishing that court. She then went on to be President of the Australian Law Reform Commission, but she came to the position as an elected member of CEDAW with a long-standing interest in women's lives, but with also a lot of judicial competence and understanding. So she played a wonderful role as a member of CEDAW, and this was recognised when she was elected as chairperson of the CEDAW committee. Quite a signal honour to be recognised by your international peers as somebody of huge integrity and huge wisdom. So I think that we should all, in a way, bask in Elizabeth's reflected glory. I don't think she'll mind. She's a very generous person, and really observe that it was her dedication, her attention to detail that has really enlarged and strengthened the whole of the texture of the treaty. Well, there has been quite a push at the United Nations for the last few years, really spearheaded by the Canadian diplomat Stephen Lewis, to try to reform the term is the gender architecture of the United Nations. Long observers of the UN will know that women were dealt with in different parts of the organisation, and there were some bodies devoted to women, some that had a part-time interest in women, some that were meant to look at women and never got round to doing so. And there's been this idea that if we could actually pull together the parts of the United Nations that deal with women and properly resource them, then we would have a real engine room to deal with the problems that confront women across the world. And a lot of people worked very hard on the various proposals, and inevitably at the United Nations there was a huge amount of politicking behind this. But earlier this year the General Assembly did finally vote on one of the proposals, and it looks as though the new gender architecture is up. We can't say it's yet running, it's yet to go into force. It's going to depend very much on who quite is going to lead it, and the amount of resources that's put into it. But I see it as a very positive step. I think we can see that the position of women in the international community, and certainly inside the United Nations, has been beset by a tension. Is it better to be part of the mainstream, just for women to be recognised as equals with men and to be part of all the same bodies? Or do we have to recognise the fact that there's systemic discrimination against women and create separate bodies for women, a commission on the status of women and so on, that we would need in addition to a commission on human rights? And that tension between whether you go for women being incorporated into the mainstream or women forming becoming part of specialised bodies goes right back to the 18th century French feminist Olympe de Gouges, who incidentally lost her head for her heretical views. She was too much even for the French revolutionaries, and she was executed by them. But she wrote very feelingly in the 18th century about this tension that women always face in political life, whether they should seek to create their own organisations and run the risk of those organisations being marginalised and being sidelined, or should women simply infiltrate, devote themselves to bodies that purport to be applying to everybody. And the new gender architecture, of course, takes the line that in fact it's very important to build expertise and to create a specialist architecture for women. And I must say I waver between the two sides, these two dilemmas. Which one is better, special women's organisations or simply abandoning special women's organisations and just going to try and reform usually very male institutions from within. And but I do see the new gender architecture as a very exciting moment and opportunity, and we hope that its promise will be fully realised. Well, I think, as I've said, a 30th birthday is a time when we think somebody, a human, is approaching their full maturity. And I think the convention, the CEDAW convention, has been always very well served by the monitoring body, by the members of the CEDAW committee, which I think by and large have been of exceptional quality. And I think now that we have so much expertise on women's issues inside the United Nations, in civil society, I think now is perhaps the time for the convention and the body that monitors it to perhaps become a little more radical, a little less safe than it's been in its first 30 years. I think it's time to now leave the nest, leave home, and to start a life of its own.